Hello and welcome to EdHeroes Global Forum on Cultural Heritage in Education. My name is Shilpi Seni and I am a research fellow at Dream a Dream. Today's panel discussion is being brought to you by Dream a Dream. So let me tell you a little bit about the organization first. Since 1999, Dream a Dream has existed to empower young people from vulnerable backgrounds to thrive. As a pioneer of life skills, Dream a Dream has been working to transform the experience of education for 130 plus million children living in poverty in India. Through its programs, curriculum, pedagogical innovations, and holistic assessment frameworks, the organization is shifting the narratives around the purpose of education to thriving. Dream a Dream's work is spread across 7 Indian states, reaching over 2.2 million children and over 44,000 educators through strategic partnerships with state governments and collaborations with other non-profits and funders in India. In today's panel, we are going to be talking about educational transformation through collaborative leadership in social and emotional learning initiatives in India. So let me give you a little background on what's been happening. The current Indian education landscape is marked by multifaceted challenges and socioeconomic changes. Education stakeholders are increasingly recognizing the potential of social and emotional learning and collaborative leadership and embracing the need to combine the two in order to drive positive change and ensure the well being of young people. While traditional leadership approaches may overlook the collective wisdom of diverse stakeholders, collaborative leadership values input from educators, policymakers, parents, and community members alike. Collaborative leadership affects educational change as all stakeholders work toward a shared vision with shared participation in decision making processes. They understand the context, build transparent and respectful connections, and create inclusive spaces. Today, with our panel of experts, we will examine how collaborative leadership can foster robust partnerships between international NGOs, government agencies, and community based organizations, and how it can transform the education and experiences of Indian students, particularly in the space of SEL initiatives. With this context, I would like to welcome our panelists for the day who come from diverse backgrounds and have been involved in collaborative initiatives focused on the well being of students in India. Please welcome Dr. Sri Hari Ravindranath, Ms. Romana Sheikh, and Ms. Amar Bajaj. As I Before I move anything any way forward, I would love to introduce you all formally to our panelists as well. Um, Dr. Srihari Ravindranath is the Director of Research and Impact at Dream a Dream. He's a psychologist who specializes in constructivist psychology and has worked extensively on culturally informed psychological assessments, rubrics, and authentic assessments. He's a passionate educator working closely on pedagogies of social and emotional learning and well being, education and emergencies, and epistemologies of education. Dr. Srihari holds a master's in counseling psychology and a PhD in life skills education. Currently a researcher, he is keen on policy change and advocacy focusing on evidence based reform in education. Before joining Dream a Dream, Dr. Srihari has worked as an assistant professor at various universities in India, including TIS Mumbai and Christ University, Bengaluru. He has also served as a consultant for a project on developing life skills based educational activities in collaboration with MIT USA. Dr. Srihari has rich experience working with educational institutions, universities, and organizations in Japan, Malaysia, the US, Thailand, and Dubai. Dr. Srihari, welcome. Ms. Romana Sheikh, our next speaker, is the co-founder and chief program officer at Kizazi, which is a global not-for-profit that works to design, implement, and codify breakthrough school models in various parts of West Africa, Armenia, and India. Romana is committed to creating and enabling a thriving life for every child. Her expertise is in designing and facilitating programs for personal and collective transformation for social justice. Romana is trained in presence oriented psychotherapy and continues to practice with individuals and groups, especially focused on the impact of marginalization and peace. She has been a faculty member for the Comprehensive Sexuality Education Certification in Mumbai, India, and a teaching assistant for the Presence Oriented Psychotherapy Diploma in Pune, India. Ms. Romana is a Salzburg Global Seminar Fellow and an alumnus of Teach for India. Previously, she was the Director of Training and Impact for Teach for India and a consultant to TFIX, TFAll, and various other NGOs in rural and urban India. Romana, welcome to you. Next speaker is Ms. Samar Bajaj. Summer is a director at the Indian office of the Michael and Susan Dell Foundation. She leads several projects across the areas of education and livelihoods. In her current role at the foundation, she partners with mission-driven organizations to scale high-impact initiatives and drive lasting systems change. Before joining the foundation, Summer spent 10 years as a management consultant at the Boston Consulting Group and Ernst& Young. She has worked across multiple sectors, including media, consumer internet, consumer goods, and retail. As a consultant, she focused extensively on researching and measuring consumer behavior and is now applying the same techniques to the most pressing social issues facing our world today. Summer studied economics at Lady Shri Ram College, Delhi University, and holds a dual master's degree in public administration from the London School of Economics and the Sciences Po, Paris. Summer, welcome to you too. I am very glad that you all are here today, and I would jump right in after those long introductions, which you must deserve. So, this first question is actually to all three of you because today we're talking about collaborative leadership and its impact in social and emotional learning initiatives. So, to all three of you, the question is that as individuals representing organizations that are working in the space of SEL in different capacities, what does collaborative leadership look like for you? And what are some factors that are driving your collaborative efforts? So, if I may ask maybe Romana to kick it off.
Sure. Thanks, Shruti, and hello and a warm welcome to everybody listening and watching us today. Um, so at Kizazi, our work really begins with this asking the question of what do children need from education? And when we ask that question as a global NGO, very quickly we realize that we only know about a quarter of that answer. And so we know that there is a certain impact of living and growing up in poverty that young people experience. We know that social emotional learning is not just a subject, but it's really a way of thinking about the whole child. Um, and we know that there are children all over the world in various contexts that have really different experiences. There's so much more that we don't know. And so really that's what made us realize that for our work, the only way to do this work is by collaborating. Um, and so what does collaboration mean for us? It means recognizing this, that who answers these questions of what do children need? What does social and emotional learning mean? What is the impact of every single context on how a child is growing up? The people who know the answers to this are really the people closest to the child, including the child. So the way we work is by, in every region we go to, we identify a local NGO partner. So that's an NGO that is much more closely rooted in the lived experiences of children and communities, who's already working in partnership with government. And so that could be with their state government, it could be with their national government. And that's at one level. And then we go into this process. So in India, for example, we work with an organization called the Simple Education Foundation. And with this local NGO, we engage in a collaborative process, which then includes teachers, community members, and the children. And it's in this community. So we expand this understanding of who is the school and redefine it to say the school community. And then we work to say that this is the group that really needs to come together to answer these questions. And in doing that, the intention is really to shift power to the community, to design and direct education in a way that they believe is necessary, is relevant, and is responsive. So that's the real intention for us in moving in this way of collaboration to shift power. um, Another one that really sits at the heart of this is saying that it's only when we come together as collaborators that we can then begin to recognize how our relationships, our values, and our culture, how does that need to shift? And for us, social emotional learning really sits there. It sits in that reshaping of culture and values and the way we relate to each other. So the way a teacher relates to a child, the way a parent relates with a teacher, the way an NGO relates to the head teacher. So all of these complex sets of relationships that really are what comprise a school system. It's really in the redefining, in the nurturing of these relationships that we believe the collective leadership is what gives way to a certain wisdom, to an answer to that question of what do children in this context need from education.
Great. Thank you so much, Romana. Srihari, would you like to add your thoughts to what does collaborative leadership look like?
Sure. Beautifully like explaining how a collaborative works. And I, as a researcher, I am bound to, I'm forced to, I'm trained to actually talk about collaboration. So I reflect everything from a very evidence-based perspective. And I would say a couple of my insights on collaborative leadership actually comes from there. I always relate a collaborative leadership to the idea, which is very similar to the community of practice, which emerged from anthropology, social anthropology, to be very specific, which is basically these are all systems, right? The systems of collective critical inquiry and reflection focused on building a shared identity. There is a collective intelligence that's actually generated over a period of time. It's also a very collaborative space, like, which includes government partners, donors, practitioners, researchers, all coming together. So for me, that's how a collaboration, which looks like, or a collaborative leadership, is a network of systems which is actually playing around. One of such collaborative which I was part of, or which I was been engaging at least for the last 3 years, is the Leicesters Collaborative. And I would say that's one of the largest collaborative which I was being part of, which consists of around 18 organizations working together on a mission to create the urgency of life skills, or SEL, and a community of people coming together to collaborate on a mission to provide how we can actually provide every young people with the opportunity to thrive. And with that experience, I would say for me, collaborative leadership is basically like it's a network of people with a shared purpose and vision, or it's also a place, or it's a space where cumulative nature of knowledge is actually created through a lot of interactions and dialogues between people with different expertise coming together. It's also I would say, like, it's also there is an architecture of participation, right? It's a system. It has mechanisms. It has a process of facilitating participation, which is to create value adoptions or value creation, etc. With that, I would say, for me, like, what excites me, or what some of the factors driving a collaborative, is basically the shared values, like, also the distributed power that actually happens in the network, and how we support each other in the shared purpose. Like, as an individual organization, as Dreamer Dream could actually do a bit of what is required, but as a collective, as a network of people coming together, it's one is its validations, and how the shared purpose is actually getting validated, and how do we actually all work together towards it. What excites me to be part of such collaborative is also how do we actually navigate through some of the systemic challenges. Like, it's always, and to be part of a collaborative, it also comes with a lot of uncertainty, a lot of ambiguity, and couple of things can never immediately get solved. It really required to unpack. We have to pause. We have to relook into some of discussions, etc. So we actually navigate through these systemic challenges through a collaborative efforts. It's always exciting to see. In Life Skills Collaborative, one of the beauty was like, as when we all decided to come together to create some value add or to create that urgency of life skills, there were teams who are excited or organizations and experts who are excited to actually create a common definition for life skills, how we can actually define some of the skills that we are talking about. Dream, or we were part of developing a robust assessment for measuring social and emotional well-being. There was other organization with the expertise of bringing these voices from the ground, like young people voices, parents voices, teachers voices, all coming together. So a 3 year, a beautiful collaborative which was really shifting the narrative of life skills, creating that urgency of life skills, also informing government officials or policymakers, why we need to actually prioritize life skills. And from my experience, I would also say the most important factor for driving any collaborations is basically how transparent and trust is built from the beginning of the projects itself. Quite often, we were like we are all being part of many collaborative, maybe perhaps, and quite often we get we step back from some of step down from some of these collaborations also because it's inability to be open and transparent. It's if you are it's an ability to actually openly share informations which are valuable for the collaborators, even if we are not asking for it, but we do have enough information. So I would say in any collaborative negotiations, the aim should be around how solutions are co-created and how do we actually foster a culture of trust. And that's the crux of any collaborative leadership, and that's how I actually see collaborative leadership and the merit in collaborative leadership. Thank you.
Lovely. It's about a culture of fostering a culture of trust. Samar, what are your thoughts on collaborative leadership and what does that look like? What are some factors driving it?
And I think thanks, Romana Srihari, for kicking us off. I'll maybe try to add a slightly different dimension to what collaborative leadership in the SEL space means to me. And I want to play on the two words of collaboration and leadership. I feel like, if you can't collaborate, you're not a leader. And, like in order to be a good leader, you have to collaborate. And so these two are very closely linked in terms of how, as we individually will move on our leadership journeys, irrespective of where we are in an organization, we need not be at a CXO role, but I think each of us are change leaders in our own way. Collaboration is, it's a necessary condition to really progress on that journey. So I think I see them as kind of almost, somewhat overlapping or synonymous, these two words. The way I'd like to contextualize it in the SEL space is probably building a little bit on what Romana said, right? So, I think today everybody recognizes that like this is critical. I don't think we have to go around convincing anybody that social emotional learning is critical to the journey of any young person. And there's an element of saying that okay, like we need to redistribute the power dynamics in terms of going closer to the people that we're trying to serve, both in terms of defining what social emotional learning is and designing what kind of support they need. And I think Romana really spoke very eloquently about that. I'd like to focus on maybe a third D, which is that these skills or this support still needs to be delivered in some way, right? And so the implementation or the delivery side also requires a great deal of collaboration and leadership as we kind of get on that journey, because that's really where rubber is going to hit the road, right? Like if we're not being able to deliver, then we are not going to be able to see the change that we all aspire to see. And I think in that sense, I would look at three dimensions of collaborative leadership, like in the context of much more delivery, I'm talking about. And I think that's where a lot of our experience as an organization, like working much more on the delivery side, has been. And so, I speak from more of our on ground experience there. One, I think, as we kind of convene towards or converge towards a definition. Like there needs to be like a leadership of these organizations need to be talking a lot more to each other. I do feel like there has become like, I define it in this way and I define it in this way. And, like somebody's focused on mental well being and somebody's focused on equity and inclusion and somebody's focused on, looking at gender. But I think all of these lenses really meaningfully need to come together. And I think like it really needs to start at the top. And leadership needs to talk a lot more and almost role model this value of collaborative leadership. So that's my first this thing. I think the second sort of spillover effect will be that role modeling will lead to a lot more collaboration amongst organizations, which today may be getting defined by pretty narrow roles, but they're all essentially like fundamentally at the heart of it. I think trying to serve the same individual, the same community, and at heart, I think they have also the same desire for change. And so I think collaboration among organizations, specifically on the delivery side. And the third, I would say again, probably building off of what Romana was saying, is that, the delivery side also doesn't just require like one specific type of actor, right? Like you could have people who are building capacity, you have teachers, you have schools, you have parents, you have government setting policy, you have students themselves, you have funders. So I think it's kind of like a multi-relational ecosystem. And then I think cross actor collaboration and trying to kind of meet each actor or each interest group where they are is important. But I do feel that like the first two are actually probably more important and more critical, because I think as a single group, when you're more aligned, then you're also better able to navigate the dynamics between other actors. And so yeah, maybe that's how I would think about it, like collaboration amongst leaders, collaboration amongst organizations, and then collaboration amongst actors of different types that are actually working within the system.
Great. I think there are a lot of interesting facets that are already coming out when we are talking about collaborative leadership. There is conversation on involving the community, about building a culture of trust and transparency, and at the same time, ensuring that these multiple levels are working together when we are talking about collaborative leadership in our initiatives. So, with that, I would like to just explore these aspects with you a little more with all three of you panelists. So I'll start with more specifics on starting with Romana. If you could share with me from your experiences some strengths and perspectives that NGOs are bringing to collaborative leadership, and how are like what are those factors that are fostering inclusive and community centering approaches in education, and how are you seeing it in your experience?
Yeah. Um, so I think the biggest strength in for an NGO is really what I started with about their proximity, right? How close they are to what's actually happening inside a school. They're the ones who go every day to the school, interact with the teacher, with the child, and the community. So if we're asking not just the question of what do children need, but if we nuance that question a little bit to what does each child need, I think the NGO partner that's really in the field, they are the ones that can really help begin to unpack that. So let's put this in the context of India. The NGO partner we work with, Simple Education, works both in Delhi, which is urban, metro, fast-paced government schools there. They also work in a village district in Uttarakhand. So children coming to both of these contexts, very, very different. And so, even within our context of India, our NGO partners are the ones that are able to go in and say, okay, for a Muslim girl sitting in that government school classroom in Delhi, what's her experience? What do her parents do? And her parents are most likely daily wage earners. They have probably migrated from somewhere else. But if you look at a girl child who has a tribal background or a girl child who has a Dalit background in Uttarakhand, in that village, her parents are very rooted there, and her experience, her family's experience, very different. So an NGO is really able to understand this and then able to ask that question of, okay, what do these children need? What is the parent and child and teacher and again that school community? And now they can get into the relational capabilities, right? They can begin to understand the nuances of how are these interactions playing out. So to give a concrete example, oftentimes government schools will saying, oh, parents are not supporting their children to learn. Okay, but who is the parent? This child is a first generation learner, and the school is teaching in English. Uh, so you have to change that question a little bit. And that's what our partners did. They changed the question to say, okay, what is it that the parent can support the child with? And how do then we enable that? So in their community context in Uttarakhand, they brought mothers together because mothers are traditionally at home and spend much more time in the caregiving responsibilities. And they had mothers co-create a home learning kit. And this is really simple things that, okay, you're working with your child in house chores. You're asking them to go and water the fields. What can you engage with them about that? Right? How can you ask questions about volume of water? You don't have to talk about volume and metrics and measurement, but you're still teaching the concept of volume. And this is something that we know because we do it. And so they brought the mothers together. Now mothers are really empowered because they know that they can support their child's learning. And that's a different perspective, right? We're beginning to shift the perspective of what kind of learning is learning. Does it only happen with textbooks and writing, or how can we see what's happening in daily life as learning? Who really is educated and uneducated? So when you work that closely and then you begin to really say how is everyone empowered to support a child, NGOs can be that sort of almost a loudspeaker. They can be a loudspeaker to bring the voices that otherwise the four of us sitting here may not hear. And then again, me sitting in my global position can then do what I can do. I can amplify that, knowing that there's a wisdom that's coming from very, very much further away from me. And then we each have a role to amplify that perspective and to shift these ideas about what's learning, what does each child need from learning, and really shift that narrative about and nuance it really.
I think that's a great point about the NGOs working with the context and sort of amplifying the voices of the context, so that it reaches the leadership as well as the people who are working collaboratively to trying to understand what are the steps that can be taken. So thank you so much for sharing that with us, Romana. So actually, this just also brings me to the next question, which is more on the research front, because data points go directly with how research um, comes into the picture. So, Srihari, my question to you is, what is how is active participation of researchers in collaborative initiatives contributing to evidence-based decision making, successful implementation, evaluation of programs and projects? Any thoughts that you'd like to share from your experiences?
Sure. Thank you, Shilpi, for the question. Because uh, there are always an attempt, so we'll see research, practice, and policy try to collaborate with practitioners and researchers and policy makers trying to collaborate. There are many attempts people are actually doing, and some of them are actually successful, some are failure, some fail due to the gap between the practice, research, etc. And I think I do have a very similar experience in terms of when a researcher or a research is actually being uh, part of a collaborative, it's actually being looked at very differently. So for me, as from a very research point of view, I would say research for us, collaboration usually means how the equal partnership between practitioners or policymakers and the other actors within the ecosystem in pursuing something which is mutually interesting and beneficial research, which is useful for everyone. That's what we assume, and that's what we actually wanted to do. But the concern many times is like, this gap between research and policy and practice is very wide, and it's been reported across. And I would say one of the reason which I always reflect is that it's basically because the process from research produce knowledge to put into use, right? It's actually very it takes actually a considerable amount of time. When we join, many of these collaborative people ask us like, can we produce an evidence in 6 months or 1 year? While we know the design plan itself actually takes another 1 more year for us to implement. Take another 6 months to actually create a questionnaire which is relevant and beneficial for the kind of questions we are asking. So over a period of time, that's what, like, the notion of research being part of a collaborative is like, it's going to be very time consuming. Nothing is actually delivered immediately. We have to wait for 3 years to actually get to know what the results means, etc. But however, like, many times we have seen most of the collaborations invite research to be part of the collaborative, making sure, there are attempts to bridge the gap between research and practice, because there is a merit in the practice we are doing, right? Now, when we invest on interventions or any kind of program that we are designing which is beneficial for children, we always want to make sure this is evidence based, and which is something based on knowledge, which can be systematically put into the larger ecosystem where we are actually working. So the way we try to do, like, even in the life skills collaborative, the expectation was like, when we wanted to create a tool, the initial thoughts were like, there are many existing tools available. Can we bring them all together and create something? Then we were actually looking at we were discussing and dialoguing around the issue of, how culture, the context, as Romana was also talking about, how Delhi and Uttarakhand can be very different. Make sure the contextual factors, the linguistic factors, the socioeconomic factors, the cultural factors are actually accounted when we are actually designing something. So we went into a mode where we wanted to co-create, co-produce, or co-evaluate processes, where the tool that we were designing, like, when the whole idea was like, in another 6 months we will be able to create a tool from where, like, the whole the building the capacity of the network itself, like, why it matters to be contextualizing, or why it matters that we have to talk about cultural relevance, why it matters linguistic and social and or economical factors are important for us when we create measurement, what are scientific approaches when we are actually creating a measure. So we can't create multiple tools for different states. So when there are processes available, there are techniques available. uh, Also understanding, like, how robust scientific tools can be created, and it took almost like 2 years for us to create an assessment. And I think on in that journey, like, a lot of learning happened, like, how what measurement means, what assessments are. So I guess, like, from the research perspective, those knowledge information which is important for evidence building, or when we say our programs are evidence-based practices, what does that mean, is something that, the collaborative were able to understand. And I think that was something we were also influential in making some of these attempts where, we wanted to bridge the gap between practice policy through research, evidence building, and data, I would say.
Great. Thank you so much, Srihari. I I mean, that's actually true that there are merits to research and how it is bridging the gap between policy and practice. And of course, there is data points that are getting collected from the context directly, making it more culturally relevant. So thank you so much for that. With that, I actually want to ask Samar this question: that what role do you see funders playing, and what role does the involvement of funders and donors have in supporting SEL initiatives, and how do you foster partnership between NGOs, researchers, education institutions when you are working to enhance SEL initiatives in a collaborative space?
So, first, I would say, like, funders as a separate category, I also feel like we should say, okay, like, where is the money or where is the capital needed? I think in some sense we are custodians of it, but we shouldn't become a force in and of ourselves to reckon with. And I do feel, as a funder, like, I feel like we have to change some of that narrative around power dynamics, I think we are all fundamentally on the same side and we all need to understand each other better. Maybe it's a little bit easier for me to say because I'm probably, at least perceived at, like the top end of the power dynamic. But I think, the capital, if I look at, the capital for impact, and all of the money which is available to impact, which we all need to channel towards, again, I think fundamentally the communities that we are trying to serve. I think there are three, four roles that the funds can play. If I say not funders, but this is where I think investment should be going. So I think the first one for me is to demonstrate impact. There are many, many things happening. I do feel that, and yes, like education is a 20-year journey. There is a lot of, but I think a lot of these things are, I really feel, well known, well understood, and we don't necessarily need to commission new longitudinal research to prove what we already know. I think, but at an early stage, like there is merit in demonstrating that this is impactful and being able to synthesize, what's happening in a specific program when it's still at a relatively early stage, and how would you demonstrate the impact that it's creating. It may again not be on longitudinal life outcomes. You could always use a bunch of secondary research to prove that out, but I'm saying, hey, if I feel like I have moved this in the classroom in 6 months or 12 months or 18 months, or this is how students are talking about themselves 12 months before and after, I think that's good enough to get started. So I think there is a role that money can play in demonstrating impact. Again, I think it comes back to research evidence generation, but I would say reasonably smart and nimble ways of doing evidence generation, not necessarily a long drawn out RCT or a longitudinal study. Those are not appropriate everywhere. I think the second role that money needs to play in then scaling impact, right? And this is where I would say, what are the partnership models that can come into play? Like Romana spoke about, global organization partnering with a local not-for-profit. Dream a Dream has their own programs where they are partnering with different state governments because they know that this is what works. And it's not to say that, okay, now I will copy paste the exact same thing and then sit back and wait for the magic to happen, but I'll continue to learn, but I'm ready to kind of be in the scale up journey because there's hundreds of millions of kids that are out there. And so I think capital has a role to play in terms of scaling the impact and architecting the partnerships which are needed and creating the environment to get to scale. And so, like, I think, like, I come much more from the corporate sector. So I think, like, in the VC world, we would call it growth capital. And that's how I look at it. The third, I feel, is, even to more meaningfully and deliberately foster collaboration, you need money. Like, to think that organically people will talk to each other and be able to share learnings. I don't think, that's possible. And so, money slash resources slash time and energy needs to go into actually, creating that trust, like breaking down the sort of silos that may have kind of got created over time. And so I think if funding takes a more deliberate approach to it, then those that collaboration can happen much better, and I think everybody will be better off for it. And so if you're supporting a social purpose organization, are you giving them a budget for collaboration? Is all your money just going towards programmatic goals, right? If you are supporting 5 different organizations which are kind of broadly working on the same thing, are you fostering collaboration? Are you making sure that they meet regularly? Are your learnings as a funding organization getting transferred across all? And then can you step back and say, okay, beyond the organizations that I'm directly supporting, like, is there a way for multiple organizations, multiple funding partners, multiple states, like multiple interventions to really come together? And I think, like, Srihari gave the fantastic example of Life Skills Collaborative, which was just so many different people. And I think the next avatar of the Life Skills Collaborative is going to be even more people and hopefully, even stronger collaboration. So demonstrate impact, scale impact, foster collaboration. And then I think for me, like a very cross-cutting theme where we all need to prioritize and, can sort of the capital channel of capital or funding we use to prioritize is actually just constantly having a learning and evidence based mindset. Because in every stage, like, at the early stage, at the growth stage, at the scale stage, at the mature stage, you always need to keep listening and, like, kind of iterating, because that's really how change works in large systems, right? It's not something which is very static. And so, just because you've done an RCT once and it's a proven thing, like, do you stop learning, or do you continue to contextualize? Do you continue to evolve your program? And do you, again, I think, meaningfully direct resources towards that? In a way that it's not too onerous, but it's really just part of the DNA of the way that we do these things. So that's what I would say, the role that funding can play, hopefully not funders.
Wonderful. Actually, the deliberate and conscious effort that funds can make in uh, in fostering collaboration and collaborative leadership is a fantastic way of putting it. It is about deliberate and conscious effort. So I'm actually wonderful segue to the next question that I had for all three of you actually to reflect on, is about scalability and sustaining projects, some of which Summer has already briefly spoken of, but some strategies that you use in your respective spaces to ensure that educational transformation project are sustained once external support is reduced, or how do you go about scaling successful collaborative leadership models to other regions? Any examples that you have from your experiences? Perhaps, Srihari, would you like to start off?
Yeah, yeah, sure. I guess when we join any collaborative, like one of the questions that we always try to discuss is like, how sustainable it's going to be. Can we like, replicate a process? Because it's always when you are being part of a collaborative, you also feel like, hey, that's a wonderful process which is going on. Can this be actually, quite often we get this question, know the process so that we can actually replicate it in some other region. And I don't know, like, for me, I operate this sustainability or scalability from a little philosophical point of view. Probably Robana and Summer may have much more strategies to talk about. So I always align myself with the theory of negotiated order, like, so all these collaboratives are basically a very symbolic interactionism, right? So it's how people negotiate with each other, and that's how a collaboration works. And it depends on few factors. That's what I'm realizing. Like, it depends on the contextual nature of the order and collaboration, the specific power dynamics that plays within the relationship, the constant segmentation and fragmentation that happens within the collaboration is what are a couple of points that allows collaboration to work. So for me, like when we were part of Lycus Collaborative, and or even when as Dream and Dream, when we are actually being partnered with the government for any kind of curriculum that we introduce, we also make sure, like, where is the point where we can actually exist and it becomes sustainable, or where is the point where the government can actually take it along, like, it becomes part of the system by itself. And I guess what I learned from my experience, or for me, it's a very limited experience. It's when the collaborative leadership operates from the place of emergence. Like, it's not very. It shouldn't be very rigid. It should be an agile in nature, where there is a place for emergence, there is a place for change, and there is also some sense of temporality, like, how we connect with time. That can actually help us to, and when that aligns with the mission and meaning of what we are trying to do, I feel like, the whole collaboration can actually sustain. Having said that, one point I wish to, like, which is an insight for me from the Lycos Collaborative, is when we involve, like, let's say if we wanted the knowledge or the asset we are actually creating, that we wanted to be sustainable, like, and if you feel the people who should be taking it forward is government, let's say, for us, so then they should be involved from the beginning of the collaboration itself. It's not like, you produce something as a collaboration, we invited some of the actors to be part of it at some point of time and then leave it. That doesn't work. Like, if you really allow them to be part of the whole idea of co-creation, right? The whole idea of knowledge creation and the co-creation, everything happens when, like, from the journey of this whole collaboration start from the beginning itself. Everybody is actually part of it. I believe, like, that's one way of actually, like, how any intervention or any transformative project that we are working can actually get more sustainable and can leave, like, even if we as an organization created something and leave, the whole asset that we have created can actually become more sustainable. I guess that's from my side, in terms of how sustainability or scalability works. But yeah,
Thank you,
I hear
Srihari.
more from Romana and Samar.
Yeah, Romana, why don't you add your thoughts to this, please?
Sure, thanks. I think we've covered a couple of these ideas already. So I think in the idea of what Samar mentioned about when you're looking at impact takes a long time, and so the question of sustainability itself also we should see with that same perspective, right? What are we trying to sustain? And then Shriyari began to talk about the process. There is a process that allows for emergence. So I think that's what we've been learning as well. Why when we work with communities, we involve teachers in the co-creation, we involve head teachers, and when they become the decision makers, when school truly becomes run by the people there every day, that kind of empowerment creates a shift in the culture, right? There is a trust, there's a change in decision making, and when that happens, what we're really trying to change, so all of our programs, whether we call them SEL, uh, and if we say SEL is about really seeing the child as whole or seeing education as having a different purpose, if our program has done the work of supporting the adults and the children to understand that, and we've then our tools and our products and our systems help them to deliver that. But what's going to sustain is that transformation that the people have gone through. Uh, but they both need to go together. So, for example, we can go and do an SEL program in school and create time in the timetable for that. And that can be one way we say that, okay, this lesson is going to happen every day for 30 minutes. That's how it's going to be sustainable, right? But let's say we haven't changed the way assessments happen. And that same teacher is still going to meet a parent and give a report card and say, your child failed. But they're happy in the morning. So we haven't really created a conducive environment for the change in culture. And I think that coherence. So when we change the structures, the tools and processes, and we really work hard at the transformation, at the empowerment of people, then the people feel empowered and the structures are enabling. So what that would mean then, what we do in our schools is we really try and change this assessment. uh, and when a teacher has the time and space to talk to a parent about everything about a child holistically, then a parent has also shifted their view of, oh, I can expect this from my school. I can expect my school and my teacher to tell me what really is my child's strength, and they can help me on how do I support. So then the parent knows what to ask for differently. Now they're empowered. So when they show up at the next SMC meeting, they're asking different questions. The principal will start talking to a teacher differently and not only asking for how many children failed and how many children passed, but the principal will now ask for, hey, what about that child at the back of the class? So that changed, right? When that happens, we can exit. We can exit very comfortably because we've changed the conditions that will support this change in behavior. They're not trying to like please two different systems, the old system where it was all about academics and the new system that is all about SEL. So to me, both of those need to go together to support and sustain this change in process and culture and behavior that we're all talking about. And we need to give that the time to actually see the impact.
Wonderful. I truly agree with the fact that your observation, Romana, that when it comes to initiatives having a long-term impact and actually sustaining that transformation is what will sustain the project and will sustain the change. So that's a very powerful thought. Samar, to you the same question. What are the how do you scale collaborative leadership models in other regions, and what does that perspective look like for you?
Scaling, or more like how would you sustain some of this?
Scaling and sustaining, either or.
Yeah. So I think, they are kind of linked in some way, because once something sustains, then it will build and get larger and larger. I may be picking a lot on, I think, what my co-panelist said. So forgive me if I'm just paraphrasing it, but I think, like, for me, the change is happening when you're moving from one equilibrium, which is sustaining itself, because everybody is aligned to that, right? And then you're moving almost to a new equilibrium, as Romana was saying, where there is coherence and all the actors there feel like, okay, like now this is the new way to be. Like there is no other way to be. So when you have moved the entire system from point A to, so change is not like moving a child from, low learning outcomes to high learning outcomes. Yes, that's a sort of an intermediate way to define change. But I think it's really where the system itself, like, starts to value the outcomes, and I think then the system is architected always in a way that whatever it values, it will start to deliver. And I think for that kind of change, like that equilibrium shift to happen, I feel like there are three ways in which that change can be, sustained, or first moved and then, scaled and sustained. Like one, I call it the hook or the value. Like, what value are we creating for people, right? Like, today we want this change, but does the learner really value it in the same way? So, what's the hook for them? What's the hook for the teacher? Is it just adding additional time for the teacher and additional workload? Is this now one more metric that a policymaker has to track in their dashboard, etc.? So, I think, how are we meaningfully, like, if we believe in it, can we also think about it from a different, like, I think I take that very valuable life skill of perspective taking and really look at it from others' perspective and think that what is the hook or the value that we have created for everybody, because I think that's what would incentivize everyone to move to that changed equilibrium. The other piece, and I think Srihari brought that up, that you have to take people along earlier in the journey. So I think the more diversified the set of actors working on the change, the more likely it is to sustain. And so I think, like, again, I would say from a funding perspective, like having multiple types of funding to drive the change versus getting very focused on just one type of funder is more likely to sustain it, because then, you are also kind of de-risked from any external factors that could affect you. So I think the diversification and number of actors, and of course, like, collaboration is almost inbuilt into that. It's also very hard to take multiple people along, but I think that's more likely to make it sustain. And then I think in the long run, like, also, and Romana said something very similar, that all of us in this room today are probably have a role for a limited time. And, like, I think for the change to sustain and scale, there are only two pathways to that: government or market, right? So I think these are the only two ways that something can get sustained: philanthropy, social purpose organization, CSR money, like catalytic grants. All of that is to enable us to get there. And I think, like, if we are not thinking about how the, like, how will it stick, who is going to take it forward, is the government going to adopt it and it'll just kind of get integrated in the way that government delivers education in the future, or, more in the private school setting, like, is there going to be a school operator or a service provider that is integrating this? And in some sense, in private schools, the cost is being borne by the parents. So is there willingness to actually pay and fund the change on an ongoing basis? Because that's the only way it can become a reality for 265 million kids, right? I think all of us are probably just a fraction of all the money that's being spent on education today. So I would say the hook, the diversification of actors, and then I think long game government or markets is the three ways that I think are three pieces that I think are important for sustainability.
Well said, actually, because in a way, what we are talking about today in collaborative leadership, we're sort of talking about ecosystems and how these ecosystems come, these different ecosystems come together, and you also, in a way, each one of us has each one of the panelists has spoken about multiple actors or diverse actors, and Summer rightly puts it as diversification of actors, right? So along those same lines, I have this closing question that I want to get your thoughts on from each one of you. Is the role that government assumes in collaborative leadership, and what are their roles and responsibilities then the as Summer also mentioned, in a long term game. So, what are the roles and responsibilities of government in collaborative leadership when it comes to SEL initiatives specifically? And how does their involvement then will affect policy change and long term implementation? So, if you could weigh in on that, would love to hear from all three of you. Perhaps, Romana, we could start with you.
Sure. Uh, I think Samar began to touch upon this already, right? I think government plays such a critical role in enabling that sustainability and the scale. And Srihari mentioned earlier, bringing government along, bringing them early on in the co-creation process. I think that allows for the government uh, to be the voice of and that's where the leading from the top begins to happen. So when our governments start valuing and talking about SEL, talking about whole child, talking about thriving, that begins to send a message of, oh, this is the new way that we need to go. But then it's really about like bringing the words into the action. And for me, that's about like the written word again, very critically, right? The policy needs to change. And that is where I would, my hope would be that we're able to figure out, and I think there's lots of work happening in these collaborators where we can learn from. How do we create space for government to hear more from the ground? I think there's a complexity there of the scale of India and the diversity of India. And so it feels like the default is to create like a one size fits all, but we know that's not working, right? And that's a complex challenge for a government system to solve for. How do they create a policy that is ground on principles of equity and inclusion, and at the same time cost effective, efficient, scalable, sustainable, measurable, and all of those things? So I don't feel like I have the answer for that, but my understanding is this is the complexity. And if we're able to come together to to hear the government's desire and need to do something quickly for everyone, and at the same time invite the government as a body to pause and say, okay, we just need to think about this differently. And from there, even if it's, and then I would say it's identifying entry points. So while the examples I gave of our work with simple education are examples from what we call the direct implementation phase of our work, that's to create the proof points, right? Like show that it works. Samar mentioned this early on. But the entry point to do the work at scale may not be the same. So there may not be a readiness yet, but what else can be the entry point? And again, I think to understand that what are we trying to really scale and shift in the system? It's the purpose of education. It's how we see the child. It's bringing in social emotional learning. And maybe in the next 3 years, we can't change the entire curriculum. Can change is how a teacher relates to a child. What we can change is how do we train the teachers? Can we start training teachers and let them experience a holistic performance appraisal? Can we train teachers in a way that they receive consistent, stable well-being plus competence-based support, right? So I think finding that entry point, again with the long game in mind, knowing that this is a change in culture and practice, I think somewhere there we might find and be able to support government to make these policy decisions also with a longer term time frame. So helping that staging that out, but it needs to be, I think that again it's that combination of what are we saying we value, because government has the power to influence conversation and we have to leverage that, and can my words and my written word match? So can my policies really be supportive of what I'm saying I value for children?
Wonderful point there, Romana. How to strike a balance between the written word and what is it that we are practicing, or what is the need of the child on the ground. So, Summer, anything that you'd like to add to that on what are the roles and responsibilities of government in a collaborative leadership space?
Flip the question. I think government is doing what it is being set up to do. There's a policy today that talks about life skills, social emotional learning, 21st century skills. Holistic progress cards have been designed. Like, I think in the last few years, we have seen a significant movement messaging from the government that this is important. Now I think the idea is like, where do you start converting that intent into practice, and obviously like better defined policies, processes, etc., so that it starts to become real. And there I think I would flip the conversation to say that, like, what is it that we as a sector or sort of believers in this space can do to set the government up for success. I think meeting them where they are, or again, to paraphrase what Romana said, like figuring out what the entry point is. Somebody may be okay to reform curriculum, somebody may just be okay with doing 1 day a week, somebody may just want to do like a no bag day. I think just starting where they are is is the right way to go, because otherwise, then I think we are ourselves not embodying the principle of collaborative leadership. So I think meeting the government where they are and trying to figure out like what's the starting position where we can kind of co-travel on this journey together. I think significantly simplifying the narrative, because government is a large and complex system. It is still more centralized than we would like it to be. Like, a state has anywhere between 10,000 to like 70,000 schools, and I think like we do have some time to go before, like, we can really have every school kind of deciding what they do, or like, so I think it will still be a combination of some one size fits all with some contextualization, customization. But can we just get started and learn along the way? Like, obviously not get started in a really foolish manner where we have no information and are just putting, like, rolling out bad things on the ground. But I think if we have some conviction that this is what works, then just kind of simplifying it, making it easy for government. I think like there's a big role that all of us can play in trying to put ourselves in their shoes and just thinking about like they are dealing with whole set of issues beyond just social emotional learning, right? Like there's FLN vision, there's midday meal, there's infrastructure, there's teachers. And so how can we set up the government to deliver successfully, I think is the sort of the underlying question.
Right. Thank you so much, Summer. I think uh, it obviously gives a perspective on how much there is on the government's plate as well. Srihari, your thoughts on this question?
I'm not sure how many of us know this fact. Like, so there is also a group of people who study the personality styles of people joining this collaborative. So government, who are these government people? Like the government officials who join this collaborative, they used to have a personality style, and we call it as the public leadership style. So which is like, in any collaborative where government actor actually joins, they comes with a high sense of political accountability. There's a lot of bureaucracy or rule following that they wanted to do, or there is also sometimes the political loyalty, etc., are some of the traits that you'll see in the room. And with that, I would say, in my experience, or like when government officials decide to be part of collaborative, it they always love to be part of collaboration because they would like to listen. They would like to know the innovation. They see merits in these collaborations. But what makes them to decide based on the nature of the problem or the innovation that we are bringing, the problem that you are trying to solve. Like as Samar was saying, we all know the urgency of life skills. We everybody admits the fact that it's a need of the hour. So what is that problem or what is that innovation that you're bringing which can lead to a policy change is what they are actually looking for. So as when a government officials or the part of any collaborative, one of their expectations is, okay, can I get some insights which can actually lead to a policy change? Is it a well-defined problem which makes sense for me? Is there a meaning-making process that happens in my thought process when the innovation ideas is actually being discussed? Second, I also felt when we see the government actors, they may be in and out of collaboratives quite often because they also decides to be part of a collaborative based on the nature of the collaboration, so how the structure of the collaboration itself. Like, is it a government led? Is it highly centralized? Is it really a community driven initiative that the root grounded approaches are actually getting us insights back to us, etc. is something that look forward for. So these are two ways in which government officials basically look forward in any kind of in any kind of collaborative. And I would say, I was recently reading a paper on transforming government through collaborative leadership. So if I conclude, I would say, based on these, if they find merit in innovation, if they find this nature of the collaborative being really useful, they what the paper actually talks about is they become an innovative seeker. Government becomes a innovation integrator. They become a catalyst, and most importantly, they can also become the champion for this collaborative itself. So yeah, with that, I would say, yeah, that's a role and dynamic in which governments really come into picture. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Srihari. I think it's a great way to sort of round off the discussion that we were having about the roles and responsibilities of government and how government can become a catalyst for change to a great extent if they are sort of brought in from day one, and then they are sort of, there is a buying in of them in the goals and purposes that we're trying to solve and the problems that we're trying to solve. So thank you so much for that. I think I would like to just conclude the conversation that we've been having here with these words that I read when I was reading about collaborative leadership from Barkers and Tinney. And they say that real collaborative leadership is a multifaceted and highly contextualized activity where interconnected pieces come together and work together to bring clarity and focus. And in our discussion, we heard a lot about how it is important for us to come together. There is an importance of community of practice. There is an importance for listening to the community as well, and at the same time empowering them, enabling them by creating that conducive environment through deliberate action by all stakeholders, so that they can all come together and a change that is long lasting, long impacting, and not something that is going to be a short term effect, but something that is going to be a transformational experience for everybody. So that is something that I am taking away as well from today's panel. We examined a lot about the strengths and the challenges that come with collaborative leadership, and when you're trying to collaborate as multiple stakeholders in trying to solve a problem that we all know exists, and we're trying to do good at the end of the day. So thank you so much, our panelists, Srihari, Romana, Samar, for taking out the time and talking to us today. Thank you so much, EdHeroes, for creating this platform for us where we could have this discussion. And I sincerely hope that this discussion was insightful for our audience as well, and they take away something that is applied to their context as well. This is on that note, Shilpi Seni signing off, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of the event as well. Thank you.